Oh my goodness, my friends. It is so good to virtually see you here. Welcome back. I hope that I have some readers for this one. I have another book, and it's the end to the Lovable Lyle mystery that I've been having. There are more Lyle books. I'm, of course, talking about Bernard Waber's series about Lyle the crocodile. And this one is called Lovable Lyle. And you can tell from looking up here that who couldn't love a crocodile because they are very handsome, peaceful, friendly-looking creatures. But this is the book I've been meaning to read the whole time. And I read two other books that I thought were this one, and they were very fun, but they were not the Lyle I was looking for. So let's go ahead and get started with Lovable Lyle the Crocodile by Bernard Waber. There's the cover, and just as a note, it doesn't show up so much on this, but I had to get this book because I did not have it in the library from an online vendor. Name starts with an A, ends with Azan. And it said it was in very good condition, and then when I got it, it's got some big old nasty stains on it. If you can see near the top, there's a big watermark. And it is not in great condition, so I won't be adding this to our library collection. But it is fine to read from, and the illustrations don't look that bad. So here we go with Lovable Lyle. Oh, it's everyone's favorite page. So this book was written in 1969, 1 year before I was born. And I want to say thank you to Bernard Waber, and I want to say thank you to Houghton Mufflin Publishing Company for letting us read this book for pure educational and entertainment purposes and not for any sort of profit at all. We're just going to enjoy it within the Leshai community. And you see right there, it's a Children's Choice Book Club edition. I think that means it's a little bigger than the original one that came out, so we get to look at the nice pictures. And you can see right there the illustration. Oh, here we go. Everyone loved Lyle the crocodile. The Prim family with whom he lived loved him dearly, of course. So this comes kind of in the middle of some of the other two books we've read, but here we go. There's Lovable Lyle with his family. Nope. And I don't have any exotic pets in my house. I have a couple of dogs. But then I did find this little fellow in the backyard, and it looks like a bird with a very sweet, lovable mustache. This is not part of the book. This is just a little personal note. But this is actually a little tiny bird picking up dog hair and carrying it off to make a nest. But I thought it was just a hilarious photo. So there is my lovable, exotic, and rare pet. Back to the book. Gosh, Mr. McNew. And the bakery lady loved him. She always gave Lyle a cookie, his favorite kind, with colorful sprinkles on top. And Mr. Delight, the ice cream man, loved him. He always invited Lyle to climb aboard his truck and clang the bell. Oh, that sounds like so much fun. And Bird loved him. Love Lyle, squawked Bird. My bird chirps. It does not squawk or use human language. And the children loved him. They always called for Lyle to come out and play. And in return, Lyle loved the whole wide, wonderful world. He didn't have one single enemy in it. Or so he thought. Up when you remember he had some cats in the other stories that caused him some problems, but it seems like he's definitely made friends with the neighborhood creatures. One day, quite mysteriously, a note addressed to Lyle was slipped under the door of the house on East 88th Street. Dear Lyle, Mr. Prim read to him, I hate you. I hate you more than anything. I hate you so much I can't stand it. The note was signed, Your Enemy. Everyone was so surprised. Oh, how dreadful, cried Mrs. Prim. Whatever reason could anyone have for hating Lyle? Don't worry about it, Lyle, said Mr. Prim. Just keep being your wonderful self and try to forget this ever happened. Lyle went off to bed that night, trying hard to forget. Still, as he switched off the lights and gazed down upon the empty street below, he could not help sadly thinking, somebody out there hates me. I guess Lyle's probably about to climb into his bathtub for a night's rest, because I remember that from the other books. The next day, Lyle lost himself in play and managed to forget all about that note, only to be reminded by a second one, delivered as mysteriously as the first. Dear Lyle, read Mrs. Prim, I hate you even more today than I did yesterday, if that is at all possible. And again the note was signed, Your Enemy. "Oh, these horrible notes have just got to stop!" Mrs. Prim cried out desperately. Lyle wanted the notes stopped too. He was so unhappy about them. There were days he just couldn't be coaxed out of the house. He began to wonder if he was growing ugly. He practiced smiling. There's Lyle's bathtub I was talking about. That would really upset me quite a bit too. Please don't send me notes like that. At other times, he was outdoors being his friendliest to everyone, hoping somewhere, somehow, his enemy would see what a nice crocodile he really was. He smiled big, big smiles, and he waved big, big waves, greeting one and all as warmly and as joyously as he knew how. He performed all of his surefire tricks to amuse people, and he practiced new ones at home each night. Wow, maybe you're trying too hard. I'm looking in the crowd. I'm looking at all of the people in the illustrations over there and see if anybody looks like they would be hateful towards Lyle, like this is a mystery. It's a pretty nice mixed crowd. I'm not seeing anybody looking like a sneaky. He was kind and helpful and courteous. He held doors open for people loaded down with heavy packages. He offered his seats on crowded buses. He shared his umbrella. "My, doesn't he have the nice manners?" one lady replied. "I've never seen anything like it." Another answered another. Probably should have given them separate voices. Poor Lyle worked so hard at being nice, he was positively exhausted by the end of the day. Indeed, all of the Prims were unhappy about the notes. Each time they heard someone approaching outside, Joshua or Mr. Prim, sometimes the entire family would rush to the door in hopes of catching the note writer in the act. They even took turns watching from the window. The whole family is in on this spy game. One afternoon, Mrs. Prim, Joshua, and Lyle came across the words, "Down with crocodiles," brazenly scrawled across the fence near home. Mrs. Prim tried hopelessly to erase the nasty words with a tissue. "Well, Lyle," she said, as they made their way home, "it seems, no matter how much we may think we want to, it isn't always possible to please everyone, or to be liked by everyone." As they approached their house, they noticed the small figure of Clover Sue Hipple, the new girl in Joshua's class. There's little Clover Sue. By the time they reached the door, Clover was gone, but resting under the door was still another note. "I just don't know if I can bring myself to read it," sighed Mrs. Prim, but she forced herself just the same. "Dear Lyle," she read, "I wish you would go away and never come back. Ever, ever, ever again." Once more it was signed, "Your enemy." Sadly, Mrs. Prim crumpled the note in her hand. Oddly, during the next several days, Mrs. Prim and Lyle found themselves running into Clover Sue Hipple almost everywhere they went. At the supermarket, they discovered her peeking out from behind a huge display of cornflakes. Curious. Another time, they caught a glimpse of her hiding behind a tree. And again, one afternoon, they discovered her crouched behind a mailbox. If she is the little hater, she needs to practice her hiding skills because she is very obvious. Each time Mrs. Prim smiled and tried to say hello, and each time Clover skittered off before she had a chance. One day, as she was about to leave the house, Mrs. Prim glanced down just in time to see a note wiggling its way into the house. Quickly, she opened the door. Before her, wide-eyed with surprise and still clutching the note, stood Clover Sue Hipple. "Clover, dear, please don't run away," cried Mrs. Prim. "I would like to speak with you about Lyle. Has Lyle done something to make you angry with him?" "He takes away my friends," Clover burst out. "He what?" "He takes my friends away from me," the little girl said again. "When Lyle comes out to play, my friends run away. They run to play with him, and they play with him all the time. I never have any fun when Lyle's around." "But why can't you play with Lyle too?" asked Mrs. Prim. "Because," answered Clover. "Because of what?" "Because I'm not allowed. My mother says I'm not allowed to play with crocodiles." Hmm. That does seem kind of hateful, not allowing you to play with crocodiles, but I bet my mom wouldn't allow me to play with crocodiles either. Crocodiles are pretty scary. Lyle is definitely an exception, though. Let's see where this goes. Why don't you invite Clover's mother to meet Lyle, suggested Mr. Prim that night. I'm sure when she sees for herself how gentle Lyle really is, she wouldn't mind if Clover plays with him. Mrs. Prim telephoned Clover's mother the very next day. Lyle and I want so much to meet you, she said. Could you join us for tea tomorrow afternoon? I'd be delighted, answered Mrs. Hipple. Mrs. Hipple made a note of the address, and all was cheerfully arranged. All right. Now, who is this nice Mrs. Prim? Clover's mom wondered, setting up the new house. Now, who is this nice Mrs. Prim? Clover's mother wondered. Setting up the new house had left her little time for meeting the neighbors. And who is Lyle? The only Lyle she knew was that wretched Lyle the crocodile creature who lived with the most peculiar family somewhere nearby. Imagine, she chuckled disapprovingly, a crocodile living among decent, respectful people. But this Lyle, he must be that nice Mrs. Prim's husband, she decided. Of course. Ooh, she's going to be in for a surprise. Now remember, Lyle, said Mrs. Prim the following afternoon, when Mrs. Hipple arrives, greet her with your very best manners. Offer to take her coat, and when you've hung it neatly in the closet, join us in the living room. Understand? Lyle nodded. Good, said Mrs. Prim, humming as she returned to the kitchen. When Mrs. Hipple arrived, Lyle started down the stairs to meet her, but then he stopped. Suppose she won't like me, the thought popped into his head. Suddenly a wave of shyness came over Lyle. Suddenly the last thing in the world he wanted to do was to meet Mrs. Hipple. Lyle, where are you? We have company. Mrs. Prim called again, and she led her guest into the living room. He wanted to go to her, but instead, and although he kept telling himself it was absolutely the silliest, most ridiculous thing he could possibly do, Lyle squeezed himself into the closet and hid. Mrs. Prim looked for him upstairs, and she looked for him downstairs. I just can't imagine what became of Lyle, he heard her exclaim. Oh my goodness. There is Lyle all squished up in the closet. Look at that. Look at all those fanciful hats. Amid the tinkling of teacups, Lyle could hear the voices of the two women. They talked about this and that and everything under the sun. It was so stuffy and uncomfortable in the closet, he began to wish they would talk about Mrs. Hipple leaving. At long last, Lyle heard Mrs. Hipple saying, I must go now, and Mrs. Prim saying, I'm so glad you came, and so sorry you missed Lyle, but I do hope you'll be meeting him real soon. Then Lyle heard the handle of the closet door turn, and Mrs. Prim said, Here, let me get your coat. Eee! There is Lyle all pressed in there, and you can imagine what's going to happen. The instant the door popped open, Lyle fell out upon both women. Mrs. Prim let out a sharp gasp, and Mrs. Hipple definitely screamed. And I'm not going to scream because I'm in the house with lots of other working people, and that would be a little disruptive. Are you all right? Are you all right? Mrs. Prim cried out as they struggled to their feet. Take him away! Take that monster away from me! Mrs. Hipple began to shriek. Oh, please, he won't hurt you. I promise he won't hurt you, Mrs. Prim tried to reassure. Look at him. He's more frightened than you. Let me out of here, Mrs. Hipple shrieked on. Let me out of this terrible house. Mrs. Prim opened the door as Mrs. Hipple, excuse me, it'll pop up here. As Mrs. Hipple, her hair and clothes all in a rumble, stumbled from the house. If that crocodile so much as crosses my path, I'll have him arrested, she called back over her shoulder. This is supposed to be a nice neighborhood, you know. Poor Lyle, sighed Mrs. Prim that night. Now he's afraid he's going to be arrested. We're just going to have to think of something to take his mind off his troubles. It's a sad, sad thing when people are just arrested for no good reason. On the first warm day, the Prims knew just what to do for Lyle. We'll take him to the beach, they decided. Swimming has always been Lyle's favorite sport, smiled Mrs. Prim. And he's by far the best swimmer in the family, her husband added. While Mr. and Mrs. Prim made themselves comfortable and Joshua started on a sandcastle, Lyle took a running dive into the water. Lyle's water stunts delighted everyone close by. He's doing the upright, he's doing a super spin, he's standing on his snoot, he's doing a little back kick. He does seem to be having quite a bit of fun. The water looks a little murky though. Everyone, that is, except Mrs. Hipple, who had just arrived, and with Clover was dunking her feet. Mrs. Hipple set out at once to find a lifeguard. Lifeguard, lifeguard, she cried. Do you permit crocodiles to bathe here? Certainly not, answered the lifeguard. Well, it might interest you to know there's a crocodile bathing out there this very minute. Mrs. Hipple pointed to the spot where she had seen the crocodile. Haters gotta hate. Suddenly, everyone on the beach was looking and pointing, but not at a crocodile. They were pointing at a little girl thrashing about helplessly in the water. Clover! Clover! Cried Mrs. Hipple. She's drowning! The lifeguards immediately pushed off to the rescue, but Lyle raced to the scene before them. There's a crocodile out there, someone gasped. No, no, it's Lyle, called Mrs. Prim, standing nearby. I mean, it's Lyle the crocodile. Oh, I just want to add a close-up of poor little Clover. She's drowning out there, and it looks like she's so far away and so by herself. Seems like somebody should have been watching. Lyle brought a very wet but happy Clover safely back to shore. Hooray for Lyle! The crowd shouted. Oh, Lyle, my dear friend, sobbed Mrs. Hipple. Oh, wow. How can I ever thank you enough? Everyone was so proud of Lyle, immediately appointed honorary lifeguard. He was then given a hat, a sweatshirt, and a silver whistle. Lyle, you're a hero, said the head lifeguard. Feel free to come here and save people from drowning anytime you choose. Oh, and again, styly clothes in this book. What stylish lifeguards they are. The next day, a note addressed to Lyle was found under the door of the house on East 88th Street. Oh no, not again, Mrs. Prim moaned. Dear Lyle, read Mrs. Prim, I love you. I love you more than anything. I love you so much I can't stand it. And the note was signed, Your friend, for life, Clover Sue Hipple. P.S., Mrs. Prim continued, may I play with you today? P.P.S., my mother said it was all right. Lyle smiled one of his big smiles. And there's that mustache bird again, which now seems much less interesting when I've seen what fun a crocodile can do as a companion. I'm sorry, little bird. You're just going to have to take your mustache and hit the road. So I did enjoy this book quite a bit. It was not exactly how I remembered it, but it was still a fun book. It did remind me a bit of the first Lyle Crocodile book I read, in which Lyle has a neighbor who doesn't like him, and he ends up saving the neighbor and their cat from a fire, and then they become friends. And in this one, Lyle saves a girl from drowning. So it seems like the Lyle books sometimes get a little bit repetitive, but I have enjoyed them. I don't know that I'll be reading any more in this series, but I would like to read some other books with you. We'll see how much time we have. I care about you all. I can't wait till I get to see you guys in person sometime, hopefully soon. I love you very much. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your families. Be patient and thoughtful of those you live with. And I wish you the best of days. Bye, my friends.